Hello, everyone. You're going to hear some sound in the background for a second. Let me cut that out. There we go. Thank you for joining us. I'm here with Christopher Moudy, Isandering, and Commander McMillan. We're here to cover a couple of interesting topics. We're going to discuss already tonight. We had a show planned for about a half hour from now to discuss what's going on in Ukraine. However, we have breaking news at this moment. 6 Iranian Fatih 110 ballistic missiles have hit what we believe is at least one U.S. base in Erbil. It says U.S. bases, but I'm not aware that they have more than one. They appear to have gone off near a U.S. embassy. We're going to discuss what this means. This actually, and for those of you who remember and were with us during the last time when the Iranian missiles fell into the green zone, we covered this, and these kind of attacks are actually reasonably frequent. They haven't occurred in some time, and so we're going to talk about, what we know about these attacks, what we're expecting, and what, if anything, is going to happen as a result of them. So let's start with Commander McMillan. Thank you very much for joining us, Commander. Can you tell us, just briefly give me a rundown of your CV here so that we know who we're speaking with?
Sure. I'm a retired U.S. Navy officer. I was in the service for 25 years. While I was there, I specialized in amphibious operations and operational logistics. I'm a graduate of the Naval War College and also the U.S. Military Staff and Command College. And I'm a fully accredited Joint Services officer.
All right, well,
I was the lead logistical... I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, please finish. I noticed you had left that out. I was like, I hope he brings that up. So please finish your CV
Sure.
there, because that's an impressive one. Please finish.
Yeah, I was just going to say I was the lead logistical planner for the buildup of forces in Kuwait in preparation for the invasion of Iraq.
All right, so we're very lucky to have you, and thank you for joining us. So it's 6 Iranian Fatih 110 ballistic missiles, which sounds like 110 ballistic missiles hit Iraq. That's not the case. The 110 is the name. It's 6 of these missiles. Do you know anything about these missiles, and what can you tell us about, if you've learned anything about this attack so far? It's really still kind of brand new here.
I don't know the specifics of that particular missile type. It's basically, my understanding is it's kind of a variant of the Soviet intermediate range tactical missile, the Scud. Other than that, these kind of attacks are relatively common, or were at one time. But not necessarily this size. They'd use smaller artillery kind of missiles, and it was just harassment stuff. Not typically advertised as being the Iranian government targeting the U.S. It was dissident groups who were angry at the U.S. If you believe that, I have some land off the coast of Florida I'm willing to sell you.
Well, so we've heard that the last few times that we ended up covering something like this, it was always reported as Iran attacks Iraq or Iran attacks a U.S. airbase in Iraq. And as there's clarity that comes in over the next few hours, it gets cleared up that it's these so-called dissident groups. Now, these are groups that are sort of nomadic. They're outside any major city, and they get supplied from anonymous sources, which at this point basically means the Iranian government. The government supplies them, and we've done kind of the same thing.
You need to qualify that. It's usually not the Iranian government per se. It's the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. And well, technically, they're an arm of the government. The government has very little, if any, control over them. It's kind of like saying, the American government's association with the mafia or something. because honestly, the Revolutionary Guards are like one of the big crime syndicates in the country. They're responsible for about 85 to 90% of all the smuggling that goes on across the Persian Gulf region to all the other countries in the area. So they operate outside of the normal strictures of law, I think is the best way to describe it.
All right. So ostensibly, even though right now reports are coming in that it's the Iranians, I think given sort of what we've seen and given your experience in this, do you think it's safe to assume that at least unless we hear otherwise, it's probably one of these groups and not the Iranian government directly?
Yeah, I would say that's reasonable, but I would again caveat that by saying how much of that is artificially constructed plausible deniability as opposed to reality is open to interpretation.
All right. We've got some footage right now. It's going to go over. I'm going to actually. Let's see. Where is that? Here. I'm going to put that over Commander McMillan for now because sorry, that's just where the space is.
اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد. صاروخ الله نازل
تدينا ها نزيكا
والله نزيكا
اي بابو
So you can actually see the strikes. You can see the blast wave actually hit the camera operator on this one at that distance.
Yeah.
Oh, I think this may not be the one. No, if we don't have the one, okay, I don't think we have the one of the blast wave. But there was a guy at a very large distance. They were watching it, and then about 15 seconds after the impact, all of us, boom! The guy operating, it wasn't like he wasn't knocked off his feet, but he was knocked back. The camera, was knocked back, and you realize, even at that distance, they felt the blast. So, why do you think this is happening now? Any thoughts? They haven't done this in quite some time. They haven't had to worry about this in about 2 months, which is quite a long time, given the frequency of these attacks just a few years ago. What are your thoughts?
That's a good question. I really can't say. Were I a suspicious fellow, I would say that somebody probably would appreciate having the United States distracted at the moment, and probably has an in to certain organizations saying, you do a little thing for me, I'll do a little thing for you. But that's just conjecture, pure conjecture on my part. It's not that I can think of that we have done anything particular in Iraq or against the Iranians lately that would precipitate this. So I would tend to err on the side of external influences trying to encourage such events.
All right. There's no immediate claim of responsibility. The U.S. State Department has called this an outrageous attack. As of this moment, we're unaware of any casualties. This is their Channel 24. Looks like it was not an intended target, but did suffer collateral damage. And we're going to, I think, and they're saying now actually it was 12 missiles. Not 6, and let's see. The last time ballistic missiles were directed at U.S. Forces, actually, what they're saying is, and this is actually last time we covered it, was the last time they were directed at U.S. forces was in January of 2020 in retaliation for the killing of Commander Soleimani at the Baghdad airport. So this actually hasn't happened since then, which was also up to the last time World War III was trending on Twitter. And we had a president who said that he was going to commit war crimes in retaliation. So that was an interesting week. So do any of you have any questions before we move on? I mean, if we learn anything else during the show, we'll certainly bring that in, but we're also going to talk about Ukraine. So did anyone have any questions for Commander McMillan before we move on? I have not been watching the live chat. My assumption is Maudi's on that. So if there are any questions there, Maudi, that also we want to pass on, please take the opportunity to do so.
The only thing I'd like to point out before we move on is that this isn't a small missile. Okay, the warhead itself is about 1,400 pounds ish. So it's a large system. This isn't something that you buy on the black market and smuggle around in the back of your panel van. This is just something that requires a dedicated launching vehicle to maneuver around. So this isn't a non-state actor getting their hands on something like this. Isn't something that would be.
But you had referred to it as a threatening or like you used language that kind of made it seem like the purpose of using this missile is to rattle someone's cage.
I would say that would be an accurate statement. These are not particularly accurate missiles. You as they used to say of the British strategic bombing campaign in World War II, it's if you get within 10 miles of the city you're hoping to hit, it's an accurate hit.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Okay, so that actually does bring up. So somebody
so much for signal detection theory.
Yeah, exactly.
Somebody brought up that there was a report that Mossad was the target, and there's a report that and I have no idea. This is all over Twitter, and none of it is from any sources that I've ever heard of before. So we're not going with any of it. But yes, I have heard on Twitter. So please, with a grain of salt. In fact, but it's worth mentioning. Somebody said that Mossad was actually being trained there. And that's why they hit that particular base, and they've done it now in escalation for what's been happening between. We might as well get into this too, because I think this is actually worth discussing. What's been happening between Iran and Syria now? So is that something, Commander McMillan, you can just briefly tell us what's been happening on that front?
No, You're catching me with a blindsider there. I haven't heard anything about this at all.
All right, so there was an Israeli airstrike in retaliation for this. All started, and it's honestly I've been so consumed with the Ukrainian thing. I've kind of forgotten there was, if I recall, a Syrian warplane accidentally entered. What was it? The Israeli airspace. If I recall, I'm kind of doing this from memory from a while back. This was about a week ago, and there was, oh dear Lord, I'm trying to remember now. Now I think until I don't remember the details. At any rate, they've now been targeting each other, and Israel has attacked I think it was a Syrian oil facility. There was a worker killed. They said that this was not an appropriate retaliation, and things have been escalating. Then the last I heard about it was, I think, on Monday. Syrian state media reported that there was an Israeli airstrike that targeted sites near Damascus in retaliation, and they've been escalating over there. We haven't been covering it because there's been a lot to cover, but Iran has said that they would retaliate from this, and so the question is, was Mossad being trained at that site, which I have a hard time believing, but well, you know what, I mean, anything at this point, but I'm not sure how or why. It was an American airbase purportedly, but we still haven't actually confirmed that it was an airbase that was hit. We're hearing that from several sources that they believe it was, and these are credible sources, but we don't actually have like an actual confirmation, but it looks like it was an airbase that was hit, and it looks like between 6 and 12 missiles. So is it Does it have anything to do with the escalation between Syria and Israel? We don't know, and we don't know if it was. But I've heard on Twitter, yeah, they're targeting Mossad. It's like it was a U.S. air base. I have no idea. So, any questions from Macmillan on that front before we go? Yeah, there are channels on YouTube that run with Twitter as a source, admittedly, and we do if a video looks credible and we see video of like a Russian column and we're pretty sure it's accurate, we'll often run with that. But no, we don't. We don't per se run with Twitter as a primary source for pretty much anything. Any questions for Commander Macmillan from either of you guys or from the live chat before we go into Ukraine?
The side chat, somebody did mention the Twitter story. Somebody, a grammar commie, asked, is this related to the Ukraine conflict, or is it likely related to something else more local to Iran? I think you guys kind of covered that.
Yeah, I think Commander Macmillan suggested that he could at least see a possibility that it was deliberately as a distraction, but it's like, I think at this point, we don't know much of anything. The attack is only about an hour old. So, and most mainstream news that I'm aware of hasn't really caught up with it. Reuters has it. So, usually by the time Reuters has it, Reuters usually has it before CNN, ABC, anything like that. So, when Reuters has it, we will go with it because it's Reuters. But honestly, not very many people know a whole heck of a lot about it right now. So there's a real quick, there's a question from Kristen Laserbeams, Kristen Frost Laserbeams. Was it a show of power without getting anybody too mad because they had asked previously in the feed, why would they not do it when the base was busy? And so I think this might kind of fall under the purposely trying to rattle the cage idea that we had talked about earlier. Is that fair?
I would say so, but
okay.
It was my idea in the first place. So.
Yes. We're very convinced by our own opinions, aren't we?
Yes.
Yeah. Hey, listen, if
I wish I was half as brilliant as I believe I am.
Oh, well, welcome to the show. That's everybody here. We had that the last time this happened with the killing of Khomeini. Wasn't Khomeini. Jesus, what was his name? The general, the Iranian general, who was immensely popular with his own people. When that had happened, we had reported on the fact that these rockets often fall in the green zone, but they deliberately appear to be avoiding barracks or anything like that would actually cause casualties. They're just kind of harassing and doing damage and making a show of it, and that dramatically changed. This does appear to, it was at night, unless it was targeting barracks, at night, as long as you don't hit the barracks, you're usually okay. And so it does kind of look like, that does look like that. But again, they haven't done this in a while. So the question is why now? And I think the distraction element is as likely as anything else. This idea that they're targeting Mossad, we'll learn more, and so we'll keep an eye on it. But we figured we were going to do a show tonight anyway, so we'd break early and cover it. And I'll be keeping an eye on it during Qassam Soleimani. Thank you. That was it. Well, I'm going to keep an eye on it, and I'm going to go back to it as we're discussing other things because it's an update, and we want to try to stay on top of it. And so we'll see what comes out over the next hour. Meanwhile, we have the first piece of good news coming out of Ukraine, but it hasn't been confirmed. We have reports that both Ukrainians and Russians have been saying that Donsk, which is just north of Mariupol, was actually liberated, and in so doing, that a corridor has been set up to evacuate Mariupol directly to the north, and that the siege of Mariupol is at least temporarily broken. We haven't been able to confirm that. We've heard a couple of sources that are, in my opinion, lukewarm on accuracy, but it's a couple of different ones. So we're keeping an eye on that. That would be the first, really great news. We also know that at this point, it looks like they are setting up permanent residence at both Chernobyl and that second power plant. Once again, I've forgotten the name, so I apologize. It begins with a Z. Somebody's, I'm sure, going to hit me with that. They're setting up permanent stations there. They're starting to stage outside of what is it? Chernobyl, and ostensibly because if you set up a staging area outside of Chernobyl, nobody's going to attack it. So that is one of the things we're hearing, and according to, I think it was, let me just check and see, I think it was the UN nuclear watchdog says that it looks like they are planning to take full and permanent control of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which is the largest one in Europe. Russia is denying this, but the UN believes that that's what they're currently setting up to do, is just a permanent control of that power plant. We also have heard that a local journalist in Kherson has disappeared, and we also have footage of in Melitopol, which is not Mariupol. Those are two different areas. But in Melitopol, the mayor was, they're saying kidnapped. He certainly didn't go by willingly. He was taken by Russian military out of some kind of meeting. He was escorted out at gunpoint, and he has not been seen since. They're describing that as a kidnapping, and I don't know if kidnapping political officials in an occupied city is considered a war crime or not. Somebody's bandied that phrase around, so we don't know. And then the last thing. So all of these things are on the table. The last thing that we need to discuss at this point is the likelihood of the use of chemical weapons on the civilians at Ukraine. So, since I think that's the most serious one, Commander, what do you think is the likelihood of chemical weapons being deployed by the Russian military against Ukrainian civilians at this point?
Regretfully, I think it's very high.
And why do you say that?
Both because I think it's one way for them to unstall an offensive that has stalled, and secondly because they have kind of a history of not really caring less what happens to civilian population as collateral damage from their operations.
Now, they did deploy.
Take those two together.
They did do that in Syria and Kazakhstan. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
All right, and then so one of the things is they have a playbook that they do use when they enter these kinds of engagements. The first is the false flag, and if you recall, shortly before the war, within the days before the war, we were looking at the false flags and looking at what Ukraine had done to sort of get ahead of those false flags, but fully aware that at this point it was an indication that they were going in. They were just looking for a false flag to do it. They appear now to be doing the same thing. They have done a similar kind of false flag before with chemical weapons. Usually what they'll do is they'll say, oh my God, the other side has chemical weapons. We need to deploy them first in order to stop them being used against our troops. Russia is now making this claim. They actually made a similar claim as a false flag when they first started to invade. They said, well, we have to invade because the U.S. is supplying chemical weapons to Ukraine, and that was one of the false flags that they had tried to use then. But it looks like now they're saying that they quote believe that chemical weapons are being prepared to be deployed against them. And as Zelensky has come out and said that we have seen this, that every time before they do something, they accuse the other side of preparing to do it. He says there are no chemical weapons in Ukraine. They have no interest in doing it, but he said he is gravely concerned that at this point he expects chemical weapons to be deployed against the civilian population in Ukraine. And your assessment is you think that he's right.
Quite likely, yes.
If chemical weapons are deployed in Ukraine, do you think that is going to change the U.S. response in any way, or NATO, or any of the NATO countries acting independently?
I I can't say with any surety, but I would think that it's not going to change things. I think we're already very leery of aggravating the Russians past a certain point. Yeah, because we don't want them to go the other part of WMD, which they've kind of obliquely threatened that they would. But yeah, I also think that a number of the other NATO countries are going to be very apprehensive. I mean, it's literally right on their borders. They don't want to have anything like that happen. So I don't see it changing the mental picture that's going on in the upper circles of what's going to play out here.
At this point, the two scenarios that we've said strike us as the most likely is one, somebody removes Putin in one way or another. The hashtag that we've been trending is deposed with prejudice.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and either one of the oligarchs or somebody in the military removing him either quote legitimately or he's just found dead of natural causes when he was shot through the heart 3 times and his heart just apparently stopped. Now,
how shocking!
How shocking! Yes, the heart does just tend to naturally stop when lead goes through it. Now, if so, that would be the first one, and the second one, since I don't think anybody considers that he's willing to give up for anything, really, that's really not usually his style, is that he at least gets far enough to put up the mission accomplished flag, which would be to take Kiev, which at this point Kiev has said and Zelensky has said they will resist down to the last man. They've put up blockades, hundreds of blockades in the street, armed with absolutely everybody. And at this point, there's no reason for the civilians not to fight. He appears to be starving out any city that they surround. They're not getting food into those cities. Even the cities that they've conquered, they don't seem to have a plan for getting food into those cities. So it looks like at this point he intends to kill every man, woman, and child in Kyiv, so there's no point in not resisting to a man. So at a minimum, it's going to be a very long siege. So it seems like those are the two alternatives, that he's going to essentially wipe out Kyiv and then take it, and then maybe declare victory or move on. Yes. I think, does Monty have a...
So, Pip...
Yeah.
Yeah, Pippa has a comment in the side chat. If a NATO member attacks alone and then is attacked in revenge, can they appeal to NATO attack on one as being an attack on all?
They can try. Let's put it that way. The issue is NATO is a purely defensive alliance, and if somebody makes the argument that you precipitated this attack by attacking first, therefore you're not covered by the treaty, I would imagine a significant number of the signatory countries would decline to participate.
So we're talking Article 5, which is the attack on one of us is an attack on all, but it's an attack on one of us, not a counterattack after an aggressive hostile action. So this would give ostensibly cover, but this does beg a somewhat larger question, which is Putin has said, as I would if I were in his shoes, has said, if I'm attacked by any NATO member country, even not acting as a part of NATO, acting independently, which would not trigger Article 5, which would not be, I will consider that as an attack by NATO. So do you think if a country decided to get involved directly, do you believe that he would act as if it was an attack by NATO?
I think that's a crapshoot. I really don't know. The problem being that even an irrational man is going to realize that a war between Russia and NATO is tantamount to the end of the world as we know it, kind of thing. So it may be posturing on his part to try and prevent such a thing from happening. He may legitimately believe that if that's going to be the case, since, he's person number one, and if you're going to have to go out, you may as well take everybody with you, kind of thing. It's hard to say. I don't want to really put more conjecture on that than we have.
I thank you. I think that's probably wise. I do want to ask you a question that's been bugging me for a day or two now. We had sort of ostensibly, if I recall, the U.S. government low-key suggested that if Poland gave up, if Poland somehow found itself short of aircraft, we would backstop the loss by giving them reasonably modern F-14s. And of course, one way that they would be short aircraft is if they took 21 of their MiG-29s and gave them to Ukraine. So it's like, oh, well, hey, you found yourselves, short of airplanes. We, as a NATO member, will give you guys the aircraft to make up the difference. This would modernize the Polish Air Force and allow Poland to give the airplanes to Ukraine. However, Poland came out and said, we have a deal in place where we would love to do this, but the airplanes would have to be stored on the German air base, the U.S. air base in Germany, which is a non-starter. There is absolutely no way that I can foresee that any American president would accept that deal. That struck me as utterly insane, but Poland would have to know that. So if Poland has come out and publicly saying that that is the deal and they're happy to go through with it, it seems to me that they are deliberately scuttling the deal, either because they've been asked to by the U.S. or for some other reason. Any thoughts into that? I know we're getting a bit more into politics here, but any thoughts?
It's a very valid argument. The Poles, for one reason or another, I think there's something about their membership arrangement with NATO that they can't unilaterally transfer stuff to another party, and that they have to go through, sort of a brokered deal by NATO, and that means turning it over to the U.S. to broker that deal. So whether this is being disingenuous deliberately or not, I can't say, but I think there's at least some rationale behind that statement that this may be a deliberate attempt on their part to come out of this looking good without actually doing anything.
All right, and do we have any other question? Oh, yes, please.
All right, so excuse me. We have Aries in the side chat. What up, Aries? Good to see you. Pet NATO question: Would a nuclear NATO state invoke MAD, M-A-D? I don't know what that acronym means.
Mutually assured destruction.
And launch the nukes to defend a non-nuclear NATO ally that is losing a defensive war. So I'm going to say that again because trying to wrap my own head around it. Would a nuclear NATO state invoke MAD and launch the nukes to defend a non-nuclear NATO ally that is losing a defensive war?
Wow. Realistically, you're only talking about 2.5 nations. You're talking about the U.S. or Great Britain, and the half nation is France, because France is kind of in a weird limbo of they're associated with but not directly part of NATO kind of thing. I honestly can't envision any of those nations unilaterally declaring, I'm going to use my nuclear umbrella to protect somebody who is not formally a part of the alliance. And more to the point, neither France nor England, Britain, or the United States are allied with Ukraine. So I don't know how that
Well,
is applicable.
and beyond that, even if they were to say just attack Poland and Poland started losing for some reason, which is a NATO country or a NATO member, even if they were to do that, there is absolutely no reason for the United States, Great Britain, France, or Israel to launch nuclear weapons, period. Because if NATO were to come together, they could put all of their forces into Poland and they could repel any attack by Russia to defend Poland. There'd be no reason to launch a nuclear strike against Russia. They could very easily repel an attack.
So, so that's correct, Commander McMillan. It's basically the conventional army of NATO superior to the Russian army, and if so, is it? I mean, significantly so.
Well, I look at it this way: if poor little Ukraine, which is certainly not a superpower either militarily or economically, is able to stall out this big Russian offensive as they're doing. And you put even the secondary nations of NATO, let alone the big ones, involved in it with their forces. Yeah, I think the Russians are totally outclassed.
So my understanding is that the Budapest Accords was supposed to in part cover a situation like this. Now, the Budapest Accords, when Ukraine first broke off from Russia, Ukraine instantly became a nuclear power because Russia had housed nuclear missiles in Ukraine, and they became the third largest nuclear power on the planet. The reason being they had so many of the former Soviet warheads that had been housed there, and once the Soviet Union broke up, once Ukraine splits off, they've got these weapons. We were concerned, given the policy that sort of the general thinking is the more nuclear weapons that are out there, the greater the likelihood one of them is going to go off. So at the same time that the MAD strategy started to develop...
Or get mislaid.
Well, and I've spoken about this before. And what people don't realize, the movie War Games actually happened twice in the U.S. and once in Russia, where we basically came very close to launching weapons on what was thought to be an attack, and in fact was not. So the idea is the fewer weapons out there, the less likelihood something's going to go wrong somewhere in the chain. So we made a deal with Ukraine. So did Russia. So did a number of other signatory countries, the Budapest Accord. And the idea behind this was they would give up their nuclear weapons, which for the most part guaranteed they wouldn't get invaded by Russia because they were a serious nuclear power. They would give those up for assurances from the U.S. that the U.S. and other signatory countries would defend them if Russia attacked. But Russia also said they would respect the boundary of Ukraine if they gave up those weapons. There was already significant tensions between Ukraine and Russia. So the idea was these are two nuclear powers that are very tense. We will we'll disarm one of them for guarantees that they won't get attacked. Now it appears that, at least when Crimea was seized, it was a violation of that accord by Russia. I don't recall many people bringing that accord up, and I certainly don't recall the U.S. really talking about that. Is that accord in effect? Is this a violation of that accord? Is there anything that you can bring insight on that to?
We signed those accords and then proceeded to do things which the Russians alleged were complete violations of the accords. And this is pre-Putin. So whether they're still technically in effect or not, it would be hard to say. I think officially they're supposed to be, but I can't venture a guess as to whether the Russians still consider them to be. Does that answer your question? It's really one of those nebulous zones, in my opinion.
Well, and it gets into politics, the fact is you're a lot smarter than I think all of us combined when it comes to military. So I like to ambush you with political questions so that I can feel just a little bit smarter, because it's like I would start to ask. Let's find a field that you know nothing about that I at least can feign intelligence on, and I think we're going to make that the next topic of conversation. He's shaking his head. I think
Ammo for the whole show.
Yeah.
I'll play
pretty. I've been
Sergeant
busted.
Schultz. I know nothing. I know nothing.
All right, I have another side chat real quick. Where'd it go? Oh, it's Kristen Laserbeams again. Does Putin really, this seems like a snarky kind of question, but I think it's funny enough to bring up. Does Putin really understand what NATO is, or is he convinced of some grand conspiracy for NATO to surround Russia and attack?
I would say yes, he knows what it is. He was a KGB field operative. He was in charge of KGB operations in East Germany before the wall came down. And their primary focus was probably towards getting information about NATO. So I think he knows exactly what NATO is. But the second part is equally valid. I think he is, as a Russian imperialist, one of those people who does think that the West has come to some secret, behind-the-scenes cabal plot that we're going to encircle and destroy Mother Russia. And when you look at Russian history, you can kind of understand how they would arrive at that logic. But I think that's kind of what's at play here in some ways. So I think both of those are yes answers to an extent.
Well, and to be fair, they're not entirely wrong on that assumption.
Yeah.
I mean, the reality is, look, we believe democracy is the best system ever, right? And that is, of course, we believe that. And many of them actually really fear democracy, and they think there's all these faults in them, and it's very hard for the Western mind to comprehend. But that's legit. That's that's their view. They want to keep things the way that they are. There have been a number of interviews with Russians who was like, look, we're aware that we don't have democracy. We're aware we live under a totalitarian, but we have access to all of the Western goods. We can get iPods and so what is democracy really going to bring for us? We've got stability. We've got security. What do we care how we have it? And if that's really the mindset, and if we really have decided that, democracy is what's best for everybody, well, if you're in a country that doesn't have democracy, whether it's cultural pressure, economic pressure, or military pressure, we are absolutely bringing pressure to try to get some kind of regime change. And we've actually deliberately, done that militarily in a bunch of countries in the past. Does that seem, if I were him, I'd be concerned.
Yeah, I would go even further. I would say Russian history has no indication of ever trying to transition to a democracy. It's not something that's in their collective psyche, if you will. I mean, if you look at France or you look at England or any of the countries in Western Europe, there is a gradual progression of changes, Magna Carta and so forth, that lead towards democracy. There's nothing similar in Russian history that progresses in that way. So the notion that they're going to just happily leap on the bus of, oh yes, democracy is the best thing in the world, ain't going to happen. It's just not part of.
But isn't there an argument? Isn't there an argument for the case that since 1991, a whole generation or two has grown up with the assumption that this kind of democratic, capitalist way of living is going to last forever. In the sense that
on our part or their part?
On their part. So I'm talking about the youth of Russia.
Okay.
The generations that have been brought up since 1991, the ones that assume that they can get Starbucks and McDonald's and things they potentially couldn't have gotten before 1991.
Yes, but
that is its own groundswell of pressure potentially.
Oh, sure.
Because now you're taking something away from the population.
Where's that pressure coming from? It's coming from the large urban centers like Moscow, St. Petersburg, those kind of places. If you're the greater part of the Russian population who live in, some podunk little farming community in the Urals or something, you've never seen Starbucks or a Mercedes-Benz except when the local oligarch is driving his Mercedes-Benz past. And so those are alien concepts to you. It's kind of the same as when Peter the Great started to try to introduce some reforms, and the people outside of the central government who were being forced to agree with the czar, everybody else viewed it as alien and evil and wrong, and we need to stop this guy from doing it. And I just don't see how the argument works when you remove it from the context of the major urban centers of Russia. I would say once you get past the top 10 big cities, anything lower than that, it's those kind of ideas are alien to the young people.
Okay. I mean, that makes sense. But it also does seem intuitive it seems intuitive if you assume a metropolitan youth using Twitter, using Starbucks, eating McDonald's.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You know what I mean? But you're saying that is such a small sliver of the population.
Yeah.
That,
I mean, look, we have the same thing here in our country with the division between urban and rural, with the divisions of, those who support one mindset of the political spectrum and those who are on the other side. And there's a lot of people in the middle. And I think when you get to a less sophisticated, less urbanized, less homogenous country like Russia, the middle ground gets smaller and smaller and smaller.
I'm still charmed. There's still something in my head. There's a thorn in my brain. I don't know why. It's just, and maybe it's just because it's not a difference of degree. It's a difference of kind. It's not that the social media all by itself, the fact that things can travel all across the world just in seconds. Mm-hmm. You don't think that just that exists in Russia, even though they're trying to tamper down on it and limit it. Don't you think that has an effect? Because it's they have direct access to other people. They can find ways of sending videos outside of Russia in a way that they couldn't.
Sure, but I'll give you an example.
Okay.
From personal experience. Since I retired, one of the main things I've been doing is game design and development, not computer stuff, board games. And we started working at one point with a guy who lives in, what's the name of it now? It used to be Stalingrad, it's Volgograd now. And he came up with a great idea, and we were trying to develop and publish his game design. And as soon as it was published, all the other people who were interested in historical games in Russia were flame spraying this poor guy because how dare he go to the outside and, publish with a non-Russian company because the non-Russian world doesn't understand all of these important aspects of this historical incident that you're modeling in this game. And it's that kind of parochialism that I think pervades a lot of non-major urban center thinking, particularly in a country like Russia.
All right, so we do have a bit more information. I also want to see if Xandering knows, and I know we just got asked about the accords. I think the Helsinki Accord or the Budapest Agreement. Yeah, we've actually already covered that, so that's a few minutes back if you want to catch that. The AP is now reporting that as many as 12 missiles were fired towards the U.S. consulate. So we had some questions as to whether it was a consulate or an airbase. It appears to be consulate in Erbil. And Iraqi security forces are confirming that an attack did come from Iran. Iran appears to also be confirming, but they're not saying if it was, whether it was specifically the government or one of these groups. Let's see. Iraqi officials said that the ballistic missiles were fired from within Iran, but there's no confirmation on the type of missile. Again, we think it's the what is it? The 110 whatever we mentioned that earlier. But it looks like the facility was brand new and had not yet been occupied, so that would ostensibly be why there's no damage, assuming that the missiles were accurate enough to hit their target. We already showed the news channel. Let's just show that one again real quick. This is their local channel 24, which received collateral damage from the attack. But AP is making the association that it may be linked to the escalating tensions between Syria and Israel. So again, we'll keep an eye on that. I assume Biden may be planning to speak on it. As I said before, these attacks have been reasonably common, but we haven't seen any in 2 months. And the last time there was an attack of this quality was in retaliation for the killing of an Iranian general on Iraqi soil while he was at the airport. So, the killing, it was an assassination. So we'll use that language because I think that's probably appropriate. At any rate, so like I said, we'll follow up with that. The to get back to. Well, actually, let's Xander, do you have any questions on either of that before I bring up one or two other things that we're looking at that's going on in Ukraine? I'll bring up the map and we'll talk about Ukraine a bit more, unless Xander has anything he wanted to hit, or unless Maudie has any other. Well, I was unaware. If it's his birthday today, that would that would strike me as more than a coincidence. Is Xander, any thoughts?
I'm trying to avoid the tick of correcting everybody every time they say democracy. We push republicanism, not democracy. But the point of not having any kind of history of anything democratically related in Russia is a big thing too. Even though we have Starbucks, you have McDonald's, you have Twitter, you can kind of see a little bit at least into the outside world. We're sitting over here with a very, very long history of English common law evolving over time to give us, representative forms of government, whereas Russia has none of that. So when we sit here and look at it and say, look, this has got to start taking hold or something, at least in the youth, and it's like even if the youth is, flirting with this idea, it's like we have plenty of youth in this country that are flirting with outright socialism and communism as in their economic policies, not just as, like having a socialist redistributive, government over a market economy. So that doesn't take on because we have a very long history of republicanism, not socialism, and fought concerted wars against many countries that were socialist and communist. So, it's not quite, I don't think it's quite so cut and clear in Russia that there would be that much support. I think that most of the very young generations born since 1991 are probably flirting with the idea, but it's probably kind of viewed as that's just a fad thing they'll grow out of.
No, that's how the Japanese viewed it that's one of the things. I'm always a fan of free trade because it increases soft power through the influence of our culture, which and once people start getting iPods and iPads and stuff like that, they tend to not want to go back. So we had a report on the live chat, which is reasonably close to accurate, close enough it's worth mentioning. Holly Douglas said that it's Qasem Soleimani's birthday today, and that's why the attacks are occurring. It isn't, but it's close. It's awfully close. His birthday was March 11th. Now, it is actually a day ahead in Iran. This attack occurred Sunday, March 13th, local time. It's still the 12th here in the U.S., but it was the 13th, which would be 2 days ahead of his birthday. But nonetheless, it is close enough that I think that should probably be considered. But this attack occurred Sunday, March 13th, which to most of the audience here is like, wait, that's tomorrow. It's tomorrow over there when the attack occurred. So At any rate, it is the weekend of his birthday, so that's not something I think that we should completely ignore or throw out. That's a really nice catch, because I haven't heard anyone say that, but it's not quite, but it's awfully close. So thank you for that. That's fascinating and worth mentioning. All right, was there anything else we wanted to do before we get back into Ukraine? All right. So Ukraine is unfortunately getting to be an extraordinarily desperate situation. We have already what we believe quite strongly can be claimed by this point to be human rights violations, including war crimes and the attempt to starve out cities. We've had reports of starvation, especially of children. When we say starvation, usually it's actually dying of dehydration. You can go usually about 2 weeks without food. You can only go about 4 days without water. But, for simplicity, most people just sort of say starving to death. Nonetheless, we've had reports of starvation in Mariupol. We've had reports of people trying to leave basements where they've been sheltered and being shelled, so they can't leave to get food. The city is completely out of food. And the evacuation corridors have had actually some success, but it's so slight, it's very hard to... There's been over 2 million people evacuated from the country, but most of those evacuation points are not from the cities that are being sieged. They're from everybody else fully aware that the army is coming. The corridors have evacuated now, I believe yesterday they evacuated a total of about 25,000 people. That is not a lot, and they are continually being shelled, and now we have reports of butterfly bombs being dropped in that area. These are bombs, I think they're called toe busters. The idea is to maximize injuries to people who trigger these bombs, but not to kill them, so that they have to now be carried, and any military or civilians who are attempting to flee the area are slowed by the casualties. It is a war crime to use them. It appears they've been dropped, and we now are unfortunately reasonably confident that Putin is setting up an excuse to deploy chemical weapons in the area. What I'm going to do now, let's bring up the map here real quick, and I will just, I'm just going to bring up the map full screen. I think I'm going to, if I can find it. Things move around on this interface quite a bit here, so... Here's the map. There's Mariupol, which is, for all intents and purposes, surrounded, and they are both starving the city out, and they are attempting to, they're shelling the living daylights out of the civilian areas. We've unfortunately we've shown footage of that, and it's profoundly unpleasant. It's crystal clear that they're targeting civilians. This corridor right here, H20, it shows here that the Russians at least control a piece of that, which means nobody's going to be able to flee north of there. But there have been unconfirmed reports from several different sources that actually that road is open and that Donetsk has been liberated by a Ukrainian counteroffensive. If that's the case, at least temporarily, the siege of Mariupol would appear to be broken, and there is a window for people to escape. We have not been able to confirm this, and it's about the only good news that we've heard really since this has started. It does appear like Kherson is at least they're able to get some food and water there, but they're not being supplied by the Russians. So the Russians have taken this city. We also have reports that a humanitarian convoy was seized by the Russians, and the Russians have stolen all of the humanitarian aid. This includes food, water, and medicine. That was intended specifically for Mariupol. They are not letting anything in. And at this point, obviously, and I think Commander McMillan can speak to this as to why Mariupol is so important. On top of that, we have the Kharkiv is continuously being shelled, and they've made one foray into it, and there was fighting in the streets. They haven't gone back in since then, but they have continued to shell that. It's one of the cities that's getting shelled the heaviest. And then if we go here to Kiev, where once that begins, that's going to be probably one of the greatest human rights tragedies that we've seen. It's certainly going to. We've already faced the greatest we've seen since World War II. This looks like they are preparing for what would be equivalent to the 900-day siege of Leningrad, just one of the most gruesome and difficult sieges in human history. The President Zelensky has come out and shown himself walking the streets of Kiev and is very keen to show that he is still there. And he says that they will fight to a man. They've set up hundreds of roadblocks. Any attempt, I think, to go in would be. It's going to be some pretty brutal fighting. The 40-mile column, which had been stalled, is now moving again, but very slowly. They've only made between 3 and 5 miles progress in about 2 days, but they are starting to encircle the city. Commander McMillan, you take a look at this map, and what do you see?
Where to go?
Oh, I got to put it back. Okay, let's put it back up. Sorry, there it is. So, you're expected to go from memory, sir. I don't understand. So,
there you go.
But we can focus on any area if you'd like to see it. That's
fine.
Yeah,
I think you got 3, arguably 4 things that are going on at the same time. One, they're trying to link up the Donetsk and Luhansk regions with the Crimea. That gives them a really solid bargaining point if and when this does go to a negotiating table of, we're going to take the whole eastern side of Ukraine. You can live out your days in the rump end on the other side. So Mariupol becomes critical as it's the linchpin between those areas. It's also the major point on the Sea of Azov over there, which is the body of water you see. The other one that's up further north is Kharkiv, depending on how you want to pronounce it. That's a major industrial city, and I'm sure they want to take that because, again, that's securing that eastern part of the country. It's a major population center. So, again, you end up forcing Ukraine to become a rump state after you take it. Finally, you have the stuff going on over around Kiev. I think they've realized that trying to storm Kiev is going to be prohibitively expensive and costly, so they're going to, I suspect, just try to isolate the place and starve it into submission. It'll be a long, grueling operation even to do that, but it'll be far less costly for them than trying to storm the place. And I think as goes Kiev will be the determination of as goes the country itself. And then finally, on the Black Sea coast, you've got Odessa. I know they've tried to do stuff in Odessa, and it's always failed. I think they kind of need to secure that one as it basically cuts off the last significant port that the Ukrainians can use to bring in stuff, or in the post-war period to export their own commodities. Otherwise, everything has to go through, rails, and that's a little harder to do and a little more expensive to do. It's also easier to shut down that kind of a route.
So now this river has been
that's
their
why
major...
I think things.
Apologies, I stepped on you there. This river has been their major means of importing and exporting. They need that river in order to get most of their products in and out of Ukraine. They also need Odessa for that. If they lose everything east of the river, which is also most of their production and food production and industry is east of the river. If they lose everything east of the river, if they lose the river and they lose Odessa, is there any means in which Ukraine could actually continue to function on its own? It seems like most of anything that's economic and industry would be gone by that point. Is that reasonably accurate?
I mean, they can certainly survive. You've got plenty of tiny countries that really don't have a lot of industry or, agricultural land or whatever all across the globe. But it relegates Ukraine to a non-power tributary state, effectively, of Russia. They don't necessarily need to physically occupy it. They just, at that point, become the major trading partner with the Ukrainian rump state, and then they can do whatever they want.
All right, this is Kiev, which I learned Russian, and so I learned it as Kiev. So I'm still trying to pronounce it as the Ukrainian Kiev. This is the 7th largest city in Europe. It's home to almost 3 million people. You've studied sieges, you've studied wars, you've studied people who have been defending their land. If Russia completely surrounds this city, and assuming that they don't use either the so-called vacuum bomb or chemical weapons in that city, which I would assume. I mean, I think we're assuming going forward that the likelihood is very high that they'll use them. I don't know that they'd use them on a major city like this. So I would like you to explain, in your view, if they use them, would it be in a major area like this or in some of the smaller ones? But nonetheless, let's assume that they don't for a second.
Okay.
Do you think that, these are people who have said that they're willing to stay the entire time? Certainly you are familiar with the 900-day siege of Leningrad. So, I mean, people defending their homes, that was to stop Germany from advancing through Moscow, and probably helped us win the war by slowing the German advance. These are people, do you think that there's a likelihood that they will be that entrenched? And if so, how long will it last? And what are we looking at, do you think, for casualties of the city if it really gets to that point?
Casualties, massive. Even if they don't resort to chem, bio, vacuum bombs, what have you. If it's just a conventional siege, just the starvation is going to cause problems. The other thing is you compare it to Leningrad, but people kind of forget that Leningrad at least had, for much of the time that it was besieged, at least some sort of tentative connection with the outside, be it over Lake Lagoda, where they were either running steamships, or in the winter when it froze, they'd run truck convoys across it. Several times during the course of the siege, there were land routes that were open. So that's one thing. But if Ukraine's capital gets cut off, there won't be a connecting route. It'll be completely surrounded, and they won't let anything in. They will stop any humanitarian relief supplies that are going in. It's the nature of how they act. So you're going to see just incredible suffering and hardship. And at some point, I suspect they're just going to have to cave in. They can't resist past a certain point.
And I assume that point is probably going to be measured in weeks or parts of so like a week and a half, maybe. I would assume at tops. I mean, I would think a little longer. I would say maybe a couple of months. Oh, really?
That would be my guess. I mean, it could be earlier, but the Ukrainians have shown great determination, great fortitude thus far. So I don't see that they would just kind of cave in a week or something. I think a lot of it is going to hinge on whether or not they leave an escape route out of the city, not so much so that the military forces that are trying to hold the city can escape, but the civilian population can leave. Because the civilian population, of course, is going to be a huge drain on whatever limited supplies they have in the city. So that's one of the standard things any besieger tries to do, is bottle as many people up as they can, because that's that many more mouths to feed.
All right. And then before I hand it over to questions, and then I think at this point, after the questions, we may start to wrap it up. But there was also another interesting. So we learned today Russia has threatened to abandon the American astronaut in space, and his Mark Van de Hey, who is currently holding the record for the longest space flight. He is set to end it at 355 days, which is just 3 weeks, but he needs to get a ride back with the Russians. And at this point, the head of the Russian Space Agency has said that he expects that they're just going to disconnect and abandon him at the International Space Station. They've also said that without their support, the International Space Station will probably likely crash. It'll hit some debris, and without the ability to avoid that debris, which, according to the Russian Space Agency, we need their assistance in avoiding, it will crash and possibly even crash into the U.S. Most of this is not true. We can navigate the ISS from remotely. We can move it, and it's in an orbit. They deliberately have space trash at a much higher orbit. In general, those kinds of issues can happen, but they're reasonably rare. At any rate, Mark Kelly, astronaut, has come out and essentially called them cowards for threatening to abandon a astronaut in space. The head of the Russian space program called him a moron suffering from dementia, and said that they will withhold all support for any of the U.S. space program, and that, quote, the U.S. can try to get to space on broomsticks. SpaceX has launched an Ares rocket, I think it was today, and the final words were 3, 2, 1, let the broomstick fly. That was SpaceX launching their into space, and SpaceX has said ostensibly that they will find a way to get him down if he is abandoned by the Russians at the ISS, but at this point it looks like they will have to go to some backup system. The Russians are currently saying the head of the Russian space program, by the way, is purportedly a close friend of Vladimir Putin, so obviously, I mean, this is playing politics with a right? This is playing politics with it, and it's I mean, look, this kind of petty shit happens all the time, so let's not get too high and mighty about it. But of course, obviously, the ISS is supposed to be, and this is one of the things that Mark Kelly has said is, look, when you're up there, everybody's dependent on everyone else, and that's one of the reasons why it's been an important cause for peace, is because the astronauts learn about the fears and struggles of the people they're up there with, because it is life and death every day up there. I thought that was worth bringing up. So having said all that, does anybody have any questions and anything else that they want to get to before we start to wrap this up tonight? So
I would imagine it's a bit of an awkward situation.
I did see a meme that was from the inside the space station, and it was those little guys from the what's the game? Oh my god, I can't believe I can't. Among Us. It's the little guys from Among Us, and there's red and blue, and then the blue ones have the American flag, and they're like, have you have you guys seen the news? Like, so before we wrap up what we know and where we're at so far, I do want to remind everyone that all of our sources are on the Discord. We source heavily and on our Discord, and we're having discussions on this and many other topics. I mean, we have Maudy is constantly causing trouble in the psychology section of the Discord. I have repeatedly asked the mods to do something about it, and they're like, "Wait, is he bothering you?" I said, "Yes." They're like, "Well, we'll give him a wrench then," and I was like, fuck. So it's anyways, we have an area for gaming, philosophy, psychology, science, anything that you could be interested in. We're covering this so heavily right now because we are a news show, and when there's something important in the news, that is going to dominate what we do. We are getting back to our regular in-time programming as well. For Tuesday, we have Dr. John Shook scheduled to come and talk with us about the philosophy of science. We are going to be taking another stab at that show. I think, that's so. I think Maddie will be joining us, and that will be looking forward to that 9 p.m. Dr. John Shook on philosophy of science. He is as I recall, Shook is a doctor of IT. Was that right? Maddie, I don't.
Oh my! Do not besmirch the reputation of my mentor. Dr. Shook was on my thesis committee. Oh no, he wasn't on my thesis committee. He was just in. He taught a bunch of the grad courses.
All right, so I think that'll.
How dare you?
We'll have him back. Well, we tried to get Draper too, which would have been fun to counter Shook's arguments on, but I think we're past all that. Yeah,
checking all the fucking crazy boxes.
Yes, sir, we are. But no, we're past that. At any rate, so we've got a number of shows planned. We are going to be going back to our regular Tuesday programming. Overtime will not be on its regular schedule. Overtime is going to be sort of as needed. The Thursday schedule is the window. So for those of you new to the show, we do a lot more than just this.
I just got a text message. From John Shook. He said, "Yo, I just heard my name."
He's been.
That's right, John.
Yes, sir. Well, he's been following. No, he's been. No, it was
force.
The number of times I walk into a stream and I hear my name mentioned, I was like, okay, is this happenstance? Or are they just talking about me all the time? Well, what had happened was, because I had told you that we wanted to bring him on to discuss philosophy of science, and I was going to text him or email it, and he replied and he said, "I've been watching the show. I've been keeping up with what you guys have been covering," and he was really gracious and magnanimous about it, which I sincerely appreciate. We really do our best to do that. He was, and I was like, it just so happens we've been talking about you. I wanted to book you for Tuesday. Are you free? And he's like, sure. So we're really glad to have that resource. And he was the one who tried to hook us up with Draper, which we appreciate too. And we've had him on a lot. We have a series on philosophy. We try to just pick an area of philosophy and give people a primer on it. And philosophy of science is one that we've been wanting to do for a while, and we did. But I think we're gonna take another stab at it for reasons. But all that notwithstanding, and I was gonna say we'll have I'll have Maudy's mic and we'll have the mute button. But honestly, I had control of the mute button back then, and I did not exercise it. So. Well, you're going to see a good show. So that'll be this Tuesday, and then and we've got a few more that we're booking. Tuesdays is the regular in time. That's usually our bread and butter, and we have not been doing that for a while because we also cover breaking news. And I'll say this for those of you who've been around, and they'll say we often break with news oftentimes before CNN, ABC, MSNBC, most American news sources, and we work very hard to cover that. I'm the lucky one, right? Because it's my face you see up here, but that is the work of a tremendous number of people who contribute through this community, and we do it all through the Discord. So come in and see what we do, participate if you want, or just sit back and watch, and hopefully you'll find something there of interest. You'll be able to reach me and most people on the Discord oftentimes, and I don't know if Commander McMillan is free tonight to go hang on the Discord. I may or may not be. I don't know yet. If so, usually about 5 or 10 minutes after we come down, after we do a show, I'll hop into the Discord. Anybody who wants to join us there, join us. Usually about 5 or 10 minutes afterwards. Anybody who wants to come in can. So, Sinister Porpoise, $2. How do you get a doctorate in IT? That's a very good question. We're not going to right now. We're thank you very much for your support. I think we're going to let that super chat slide for now. But we're moving on, but thank you very much for your support, Porpoise. We also unfortunately show sometimes some pretty difficult things and have difficult topics. We get demonetized at least 50% of the time. So those super chats are a huge help. Thank you so much for it. Before we go, is there anything else that anybody? We do have Commander McMillan on, and we don't. He's been very gracious with his time, and we get him on. We've been lucky to have him on frequently, and we are going to do an after dark. It's going to be him, Azandring, and I. Mowdy, if he wants to come in, and we are just going to shoot the shit about military philosophy, about military history, about the history of whatever, and we're not going to talk about any current events. I told him I'd buy him a beer, but he drink of choice, your poison of choice, Commander. But we're gonna do that, and we're gonna do that reasonably soon. But we've got him here, so
I do have a bizarre question for you.
Please.
What on the Discord? Where am I supposed to go for this post-session chat?
Very good question, and in fact, actually,
I have no idea.
Yeah, there's been some. So we go into just the voice lounge. Now, we had a live room, which people I think did confuse for it, and that live room was actually funneled into the show. So if we had people on the Discord who could only connect to the show through the Discord, they'd get into the live room. But since that was confusing, I just hid that room. It's just the voice lounge. So we're just going to do, and we could add like another room, but we've got so many in there already, and I was going to say I'm worried about Titan, having like hemorrhaging, trying to keep track of more rooms. But I'm less worried about that and more worried about just how he is going to choose to retaliate if I had even a single room that isn't justified. So Voice Lounge is it. I see you're in there already, so thank you so much. If you have any difficulty setting up the audio, there's a few people in there who can help, and I can help because I've helped set people up with that. But like I said, I'm probably going to need about 5 or 10 minutes after the show comes down, just catch up with the family and see what's going on. Any questions for Commander McMillan, either, or myself, or Mowdy, or Azandring, all of whom are at this point not But any questions before we go? Azandring, I want to make sure that you get a chance to. You've been quiet, which I know that usually means you're just really listening and learning. But I want to make sure that you get a chance to speak. So let's. Anybody have any final thoughts or questions that they want to ask?
I do have a quick question. Do you want to cover the pickle story?
Yes, I do, and that Mowdy is here is the perfect time to do it. Every time something like this happens, we have a very serious discussion about humor on this show, because we do laugh and we do tell jokes, and I think it's important, but it can be hard for me to verbalize why I think it's important. And in fact, to tell you the truth, before we get into Izandring's story here, this is a Ukrainian checkpoint. They are playing chess, but they don't have chess pieces, so they're using Molotov cocktails. And I don't know what happens if you get confused over which one is the queen and which one is a pawn, but I assume you try not to have too much of a fight because you're literally playing with Molotov cocktails. But, stuff like that. We try to find the humor in it, and we're talking about
I'd be more impressed if they were each smoking a big cigar. That would be impressive.
Dear Lord.
I'm not impressed until I see that shit.
You think Ukraine weak?
Oh. Well, and I can see them so a Russian tank, the whole tank brigade rolls up, and the Russian commander comes out and says, "You want to surrender?" Says, "Maybe you want to play chess first." $2. Sinister Porpoise, Indiana State University offers a master's in IT. Yeah, well, Sinister, there's a whole to be had behind that. I don't think we're going to do that on air.
Leave it alone.
Appreciate the super chat. We'll discuss it, but not right now. Oh, dear Lord.
Leave it alone.
Yeah, it looks like they're playing checkers, but I checked on that, and every report said chess, but maybe they're. But okay, so there's this, and I got to tell you, I feel guilty sometimes because we're covering some of the worst of humanity that we can do to each other. And there have been a few episodes that have been extremely difficult for me. They've been difficult for our mods who, this increases stress for everybody on In Time. We are doing this by choice. So, it's not like, you should sit there and say, I mean, we're all here because we believe in covering this. But we had one show where we just said, look, we're going to take the R rating on YouTube and we're going to take the gloves off. And this is what's happening, because you cannot have an honest discussion about this without seeing what's really happening. And that is very hard. It's very hard for anybody who has any empathy, and it's very hard for people who are seeing this happening anywhere in the world, but in cities that are so large and with so many people, and to watch. And we watched as a family was crossing a corridor that was supposed to be open and got shelled, and all of them were killed. So we talk about these things, and then we tell jokes and we laugh, and I have a hard time with how to cope with that. So that's a discussion we've had before. But Azandring had a story, and so Azandring, I was hoping you could tell us that story, and then maybe we can finish that conversation.
Yeah, there was there's been a kind of a constant little stories coming out of Ukraine, and then kind of titled Ukrainian Heroes. Well, one of the news agencies was trying to figure out, are these stories actually real, or is this just a bunch of propaganda? And this news agency appears to be a legitimate news agency, and they at least try to get their stories correct if you look at the other stories that they're posting. So it seems, I mean, I've never heard of them before, so, you do have to kind of check and see whether, they're a legitimate organization or not, and they appear to be. Well, one of the reporters for this news agency had seen a story on Ukrainian Heroes about a grandmother who had apparently downed a Russian drone with a jar of pickles. And so they were trying to verify this story, was this true? And the reporter claims in their story that they actually found the grandmother involved, and that the story wasn't quite accurate. It seems that the grandmother had been trying to get supplies, and so she was out getting what she could, ended up with what she thought was a jar of pickles. Wasn't a jar of pickles, it was a jar of pickled tomatoes. And she was a little upset about that and was going to throw it out, but she didn't want to waste the food because, there's a war going on. So she was out to throw it in the trash on her balcony when she noticed what at first she thought was a bird. Turns out that it wasn't a bird, it was a drone. And once she figured out it was a drone, she got very nervous and scared, thought the drone might shoot her. So she grabbed the first thing or the thing closest to her, which happened to be the jar of pickled tomatoes, and she hurled the jar at it. And amazingly enough, actually hit the drone and caused the drone to crash. When she saw that, she panicked a little because she thought that the drone might be tracking her. And so she ran outside and then stomped on it and broke it up. So and the reporter claimed to have, found the lady, got her story, and concluded that the Ukrainians had finally figured out a way to up their game in tactical or tactical tomatoes and anti-drone warfare, and remarked that if Russia wanted to get ahead here, that they were going to need to catch up.
Oh.
Lord.
Actual story.
Rim shot. Ding.
You for the whole time, sitting barely containing yourself. So you clearly at least. Well, that's what I said when Azandring first told me.
When Ukrainians weaponize pickles, only criminals will have pickles. There we go. Yeah.
Oh dear Lord. So now, you had said something, about this, which I really like. But since we have Marty here, I want to take advantage of having him here for a minute. But one of the things that you had said, is Andrew, that caught my attention was that humor can be a way that we process and overcome these things. And if you want to see some of the darkest humor you have ever seen in your life, talk to an EMT. And I mean, that's some pretty gruesome humor. I imagine, Commander, you've seen it also in the military. So I'd like to ask Marty a question while we've got him here. What do you think is the role of humor at a time like this, and is it acceptable to make? Now, let's keep in mind that ketchup joke is not acceptable. I mean, that's basically a war crime in any circumstances. So, is Andrew talking about that after the show?
Don't mind me.
Yeah.
Well, I do need to point out real quick that I heard about this story, and I tried to relate it. I mean, I paraphrased. I didn't quote it, but I first heard the story on the Beau of the Fifth Column. So it's not like I researched this or came up with any of it on my own. I did find it first there.
Pickled weapons for tomato wars. So humor, yeah. Obviously, gallow humor is called gallow humor because it was the kind of humor that you would tell at the gallows to kind of release this kind of like nervous energy that has to do with the realization of stark events. And, I don't believe in the catharsis idea, which is, for those of you familiar with Freud, just the idea, it kind of envisions the human being as some kind of not combustion engine, but kind of like a steam engine that, that kind of needs a pressure release every once in a while, and that's known as catharsis. Well, that's not how humans work at all. But I do think that there is something intuitive about like having all throughout psychological literature, it's called a bunch of different things. Psychic energy, that's what Darwin used to talk about it as far as emotions go, just the discharge of psychic energy and stuff like that. So I do think that there is a charm and an appeal in the idea that humor kind of allows you to deal with the situation at a level that is not as grim as it would normally take on, right? Because the one thing that I've talked about this before. What with COVID happening for the past 2 years and then this war and everything, I tell my students this also because, you're in the middle of a semester, stress is ratcheting up. If you were feeling depressed or stressed or anxious in the face of nothing in your environment that would normally cause or events that would engender depression or anxiety or stress, well then, they might need to talk to somebody about that for those reasons. But when your environment is genuinely giving you all of the things that you need to be a little depressed. I had a hard time watching the news this morning. My wife and I were on the couch, and they were just showing very brutally honest footage, and it was upsetting. It was very upsetting to watch. So, with all that said, if we're going to deal with what's happening right now, and we don't want to have to be able to own just how dark and grim things are, I think that humor is a good way of doing it. And also, just to wrap up that final point, considering how many things are going on in the environment right now, if you do feel depressed, and I'm going to talk directly into the camera right now, so for those of you that are watching, if you feel depressed, if you feel anxious, if you feel stressed, there's no shame in the game of picking up a phone to call somebody. I don't know if it's a friend, I don't care if it's a counselor, just being able to talk to somebody will help, because there are legitimately good reasons to be a little off center, right? And that's not meant to scare anybody. It's just a gut check. And so, with that, insert joke here, right? Just to bring it full circle.
Well,
so I'll happily make myself the asshole, right? And just be like the guy that's like, hey, if you need therapy, there's, if you hurt your fucking foot, you go to a foot doctor. If you're having cardiac problems, you go to a heart doctor. If you're having a problem with the things that you're thinking, the ways that you're feeling, or the behaviors that you're exhibiting, there are specialists for that. There's no shame in going to them.
And just
I know that you asked me about humor, but I mean, that's
No, I think that's a great. I think that's a great point, and we do end up having to keep that kind of check, on the Discord especially when we're talking to the mods who end up going through as much of this difficult material as I do. I actually have someone I call. It's usually this guy, and oh my god, that guy is the one I usually call, and I sit there and I talk to him, and yep. And I sit there and I say, it's really hard to do the show because this co-host is just such a pain in the ass. He goes, well, what about the war footage? No, that's fine. I don't. But, this is Andrew guy. Jesus, I got to talk to him basically every fucking. Do you know what that's like? He's like, conservative. How did that happen on this show? And he's really good about it. And it's one of the ways I managed to get through the day.
Yeah, that brings up a good point about. I wanted to get Marty's take on this because I had listened to a conversation between a psychologist and a comedian, and the issue of gallows humor came up, and the psychologist mentioned something I thought was kind of interesting. It was like, yeah, well, oftentimes using humor in very traumatic situations is a way to protect yourself or at least partially shield yourself from the trauma around you, and helps you process and try and get through that traumatic. That's a lot of times why we'll find humor in very tragic situations, and that's not true for everybody. Some people get horribly offended because they don't have that instinct to try and shield themselves. But that some people will use that humor to try and shield themselves from the trauma of whatever's going on. What do you think of that?
Well, so what I'm hearing from what you're saying is humor can be used to process the situation, because through humor you can talk about it. You can't process a situation unless you can talk about it honestly. And so through humor, that kind of allows you to do it without it being like this. Well, I want to say heavy, but you can't, there's no way around it being a heavy situation. But humor does lighten it up so that, to your point, if you needed to process it, you need to talk about certain things. You need to talk about certain things that are facts that are difficult to deal with. If you can do it in a humorous way, it's still brought to the table. It's still being processed, but it's changing the way that it's processed. The process is different, even though the content is the same. So that's kind of what I got from what you said. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, that's kind of the way that they were using it kind of subconscious humor to kind of subconsciously shield themselves from the trauma while they were processing through the situation, so that it wasn't quite so traumatic to their brain, because they could find some sort of humor in it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's also a lot of it has to do with personality, but I don't want to get too deep into that whole conversation.
Yeah, they did mention that this isn't universal. That a certain people can do this, or certain people do it this way.
Certain temperaments are more prone to be able to do this.
We'll book Marty for.
So there you go. Now you know why.
A full show. Yes.
Yeah. Now you know what. You know why. Nick constantly makes jokes about me. He's processing the trauma of having to deal with me on a near daily basis.
That was a long motherfucking walk. Tell that joke.
And
it covers some very important points.
I can promise you,
multifunctional like that.
Come join us on the Discord, and I guarantee you the jokes aren't going to be that much better, but you're going to love the company, and you're going to love people. Yeah, they're not all that much better, but and I think Commander McMillan will be there. I know we've sucked up a little bit more of his time, but hopefully he's already in the Discord. Anybody who wants to join, I'll try to be there in about 5 or 10 minutes. I don't know, Mouty, is Andrew, are you guys planning on hopping in the Discord tonight?
I likely won't have time tonight. Unfortunately.
All right.
I should go to bed. I'm supposed to be up soon to drive, since I got installed by weather today.
So we'll see if my hope is to be there in a little bit, but there's always lots of people to chat with and lots of very knowledgeable people on our Discord. So I hope you will do that. Like and subscribe; it really does help. And if you like the content, also share it. There's plenty of also a backlog of content that isn't that's much more evergreen than this. Hopefully in just a couple of weeks, people will be like, "Oh wow, there was that crisis that happened." I'm not optimistic, but the goal is that this is not evergreen content. But if you like it, share it. It really helps the channel out. It's a great way to help us also reach other guests, and you know, the bigger we get, the easier it is to bring people like Commander McMillan on. So thank you all for joining us. Commander McMillan, thank you very much for joining us. Christopher Amati and Isandring, and please feel free to leave a comment, and we get back to those comments. And my hope is we don't come back for another day or two at least, and give everyone a breather. If there's anything that's breaking, if chemical weapons are used or anything like that, we will be live as soon as we can with it. And so like, subscribe, hit the bell so that you'll get those notifications, and you guys will know.
Okay, talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you all, and we will catch up with you very soon. Night.
Night, Nick.